You've probably been sitting in that silence, wondering if it means something, or if it means nothing at all. That space between you and her, it used to be filled with words, long texts, explanations, apologies. You tried to hold it together with effort, with emotion, with understanding, but not this time. Because something inside you shifted, not out of anger, but out of truth. And now, in the absence of your voice, something louder is happening. She's starting to hear herself. This isn't about punishment. It's about power, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't beg to be seen, but demands to be respected. Because when a man finally understands his worth, he stops offering it where it isn't met with effort, depth, or care. This is the moment most men miss. Not when she walks away, but when you stop following. Because silence isn't just a response, it's a return to self. Let's talk about what really happens when you go quiet, not to hurt her, but to finally heal yourself. And why that silence? It breaks her in ways words never could. If you find strength in this message, like the video and subscribe to Stoic Station, where peace speaks louder than pain. Let's get into it. 1. You went silent. She had to face herself. She was used to a certain pattern, men explaining, apologizing, sending long emotional messages trying to fix what was already broken. She didn't just expect your words, she counted on them. Because as long as you were speaking, she could stay in control of the narrative. She could twist your intentions, shift the blame, and keep herself from seeing what was real. But this time, you said nothing. And in that silence, everything changed. Without your voice filling the space, hers became louder. The story she had told herself started to fall apart. There was no one left to argue with, no defense to dismantle, no reaction to validate her decisions. Just silence. A mirror. One she couldn't look away from. And what she saw, it wasn't what she expected. You didn't ghost her. You didn't disappear out of immaturity or spite. You simply removed yourself from the noise, from the cycle that had kept both of you stuck. And in doing so, you gave her something she never saw coming. The stillness to finally face her own reflection. That silence didn't soothe her. It challenged her. And what she realized in that quiet space is what began to break her. 2. You took back your energy. Her ego crumbled. Most men don't lose their power all at once. They give it away slowly, one response at a time, one apology too many, one quick reply just to keep the peace. And she knew that. She counted on it. Because every time you reacted, you confirmed that she still mattered, that she still had influence, that her presence still pulled you in. But then you stopped, not to make her chase, not to play a game, but because you finally realized what your energy was worth, and how much of it you'd been giving to someone who only used it to feed her own ego. You stopped watching, you stopped responding, you stopped showing up in the ways she never had to earn, and with that, the thread she used to pull you closer went slack. Because she wasn't addicted to your love. She was addicted to the power your attention gave her, and now it's gone. Not with a fight, not with a dramatic ending, just quiet, intentional absence. And that kind of silence, it doesn't just sting. It strips her of the illusion that she was always in control. When you took your energy back, you didn't just change the dynamic. You removed the fuel her ego needed to survive. 3. She can't handle the questions. Your silence creates. When a man with presence goes quiet, it's not just noticed, it's felt. Not in the noise, but in the absence. She checks her phone and sees nothing. She posts something suggestive and hears nothing. And in that silence, the questions begin to form, not because you gave her answers, but because you gave her space to wonder. Is he really gone? Is someone else making him feel seen? Was I ever as special as I believed? You didn't need to explain a thing. Your silence did what your words never could. It unsettled her ego, because women who rely on attention to validate their worth don't fear rejection. What terrifies them is being erased, forgotten, replaced without warning. That's what your silence has done. It didn't end with a loud goodbye. It simply became the background noise she can't escape. And worse, she can't ask. Pride won't let her reach out. So she sits in that quiet loop, replaying what she thought she knew about your devotion, and realizing it no longer applies. The longer you stay silent, the louder her thoughts become. And the man who once gave her certainty has now become the question she can't answer. 4. You stopped explaining, now she's on trial. Most men think that defending themselves earns respect, that if they just explain better, stay calm longer, or respond more clearly, she'll finally see their side. But the truth is, every time you explain yourself to someone who isn't listening, you hand them your peace. You give them the power to decide if your feelings are valid, and you keep the cycle going. But when you stop defending, when you choose silence over argument, everything shifts. She's no longer the one holding you accountable. She's left alone with her own behavior, her own words, her own choices, and there's nothing to push against, no reaction to fuel her pride, no emotional response to soften the weight of what she's done. You're not being cold, you're being clear. You're not punishing her, you're protecting yourself. There's no satisfaction for her in seeing you hurt, because you're not showing pain anymore. You're showing strength, quiet, rooted, unwavering strength. And the moment you chose not to justify yourself anymore, you didn't just walk away from conflict. You reclaimed your self-respect. You let her sit in the silence she once used against you, and now that it's still, now that it holds no apology or anger, she has no one left to argue with, except herself. And that's where her real judgment begins. 5. Your peace disorients her more than anger ever could. She was prepared for the usual aftermath, emotional messages, subtle posts aimed at her, maybe even a late-night call you'd later regret. She expected heartbreak to spill out in visible ways, the way it always had. That's the version of you she thought she left behind, the man who couldn't let go without making noise. But what she got instead was unsettling silence. Not cold, not cruel, just peace. No chasing, no passive-aggressive replies, no signs of chaos in your eyes or voice. You didn't disappear to provoke her. You disappeared to find clarity, and when you returned, you brought something she didn't expect. Calm. It wasn't performative. It wasn't calculated. It was genuine. You were no longer operating from heartbreak. You were moving with intention. And that shift? It left her spinning. Because peace is more difficult to process than pain. Pain is familiar. Pain is predictable. But a man who is calm, collected, and no longer emotionally accessible, that's a man she can't reach. Not because you've blocked her out, but because you've outgrown the version of yourself who needed her validation. Now, you're not reacting, you're not waiting, you're grounded, and to someone who thought they'd always pull you back in. That peace is the most powerful distance she's ever felt. 6. She thought you'd break. You became unrecognizable instead. She assumed you'd fall apart without her, that you'd spiral, reach out, linger in her orbit just long enough to remind her she still mattered. That's the story she told herself, because it gave her comfort, control, and a sense of superiority. But what she didn't expect was your silence turning into transformation. You didn't post cryptic quotes. You didn't try to prove anything. You simply disappeared into the version of yourself that had been waiting to emerge. Quietly, you shifted inward, refining your mindset, rebuilding your body, reclaiming your direction. You stopped checking in, not out of spite, but because your focus had moved elsewhere. And now, you're sharper, clearer, not emotionally detached, but emotionally disciplined. You don't carry pain as a badge, you carry presence like armor. So when she looks again, and she will, what she sees is no longer familiar. You've become a version of yourself she never truly knew. Not the man she walked away from, but the man she never stayed long enough to understand. This isn't revenge. This isn't a show. It's the quiet, undeniable evidence that you didn't just survive. You evolved. And that's what haunts her now, because the door didn't close. It disappeared. 7. You stopped showing up, and she lost her spotlight. You used to be her constant. The voice that answered, the message that arrived, the quiet reassurance that no matter how distant she became, you'd still be there. It wasn't something she had to earn. It was something she expected. Your attention had become her safety net, even when she pulled away from you. But that version of you no longer exists. You stopped checking in. You stopped being the man who always reached out first. You stopped offering your energy without being met with effort. And in that shift, something powerful happened. She didn't just lose your presence. She lost the part of herself that felt important through your consistency. Because for a woman who once stood in your spotlight, your silence casts a shadow she doesn't know how to live with. You never said she was replaceable. You never made a scene. You simply stepped back and started showing up for yourself instead. And in that quiet act of self-respect, the balance shifted. She began to see what life feels like without you at the center of it. What shook her wasn't losing you. It was realizing she'd already been replaced by your purpose, your peace, and your decision to finally choose yourself. Summary. And here's what most men never realize, until the silence teaches them everything. Your silence was never about revenge. It wasn't a tactic to make her miss you or wonder. It was a boundary, a necessary distance to protect your peace, to regain your center, to rebuild without needing to explain yourself. In that space, something shifted. You stopped reacting and started evolving. You didn't disappear to get her attention. You disappeared to get your clarity. And through that quiet transformation, you became something she never expected. The man who no longer needs to be reached. Not because you're cold, not because you're closed off, but because you've outgrown the version of yourself who once needed her to see your worth. Now, she's not just missing the man she left. She's grieving the man she never truly understood. Because by the time she looked again, he had already become someone else. Someone stronger, someone sovereign, someone she can no longer touch. If this message sparked clarity in your heart, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Stoic Station. Your journey of growth. It all begins in silence.